Well, Matrics from the class of 2020 are this morning receiving their results after what was undoubtedly the most disruptive year in their schooling. Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga, while announcing the results yesterday, said that although the national pass rate dropped below 80%, it is much better than expected. The pass rate for the class of 2020 is 76.2%. That is a 5.1% drop from the previous year of 2019. 36.4% of the matriculants passed with bachelor passes and 26% with diploma passes. But is this really good enough? Does it bring in the sorts of students who will be able to study further in order to both uplift themselves as well as make a contribution to the future economy? Well, joining us now, we've got education analyst, Dr. Corrin Varady, who is going to talk to us about these the results and the future of this year and students in general. Good to have you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So let's begin. Your thoughts. The pass rate that was announced yesterday and the results obviously out today of the Matric class of 2020.
Sure. I mean, I think year on year I've said the same thing, which is that pass rates are really not that relevant in looking at how we performed as a country. And this whole provincial competition around who has the better percentages is also irrelevant and I don't think significant in terms of a discussion. I think what we need to be looking at and that we can celebrate is that 65% of the distinctions that came from the cohort of 2020 were girls. So our gender equality policy in education has worked. I think also it's interesting to note that the no-fee students, over 60% of them actually qualified for admissions for further education, which is much higher than the 36% of the national average in terms of students who were able to access further education. And even though there has been a drop in the pass rate, I do think it's interesting that it's kind of statistically probably insignificant given what happened last year at 5%. And so the question I come up with is, well, how is that possible? How is it that even though students didn't attend school for the majority of the year, and even though that it was completely disrupted and they had to work on their own, how come we only had a drop of 5%? I think it means that there are different models of education that are all of a sudden are being stirred up and that we can start to look at education in a different way. So I think they're the things that we should celebrate and not focus on pass rates, which, you know, given that the pass rate is too low in of itself, pass rates don't actually show us achievement.
Yeah. If we may, I mean, it's hard to compare because we are obviously in a very different space here in South Africa, on the African continent. But if we look at how other learners around the world performed under these conditions, how do we fare? Because we know that we obviously weren't the only nation to be going through a global pandemic. But is it just that our education system has been lagging behind? Did it show the flaws, or did we actually hold up pretty well in a pandemic?
I think what it showed was there was obviously an element of the teacher preparedness was good. I think the teachers were thrown in the deep end very quickly, and I think that was where we really were behind on the continent in terms of having really properly prepared our teachers to be able to take on a digital delivery of education. That was unfortunate. It shouldn't happen again. I think we need to be looking at it right now. I don't think we're doing enough right now, even thinking into 2021, that we're going to have just as equally disruptive year, I think, and compared to other countries in terms of how they supported their teachers. But I think the key to this was the students. So ultimately, it's a testament to how students are actually able to learn on their own. And if we start to unpack some of the exact subjects, if we look at the impacts that we had on, say, social sciences, which we did very little in terms of broadcast interventions, we provided some textbooks, but actually the student achievement results in business studies and history exceeded by over 10% in some cases. Then if we look at where we really intervened, so we were providing radio broadcasts, we were providing question banks in physical sciences, life sciences, mathematics, so our core innovation STEM subjects, we declined. So I'm wondering, well, what does that mean in terms of how we actually reacted as a sector to help our students? Did we do the right things? And I don't think that we're ready enough, given that 2 years ago, the president made a very strong speech, a very strong mandate that we were going to equalize education through technology. I actually don't think that we were prepared enough for what came. Compared to some of our other countries, such as, say, Kenya or even Rwanda, where they were much more prepared for what came in terms of school lockdowns.
Yeah, and that is very, very unfortunate because, this again, as I mentioned, just showing the flaws within the education sector, and that, I mean, if this, as you say, this year, it's very much so the same. It is going to be disruptive. In fact, you had the grade 11s who have also had a very tumultuous year last year. They are now in Matric, having to catch up work from the previous year and still do their Matric and go into exams. And who knows if we stop and start, or if there is the third wave, or if there isn't one. I mean, the lessons learned from last year, is there an improvement? I mean, have we actually sort of learnt from what was in effect a very, very dire year and situation for many, many of our learners?
Well, look, I think we have learned. I think that I don't know if I would call it improvement. I may call it movement. And I think that's probably the first step. So I definitely think we've seen from both provincial and national government that there is movement towards trying to understand, well, what do we do in this sector? But I think, to be honest and to be fair to the public sector, I think even in private sector, it has been quite a shock and not necessarily got it right. I think we have to rethink the way that we look at education. Synchronous teachers having to be on conference calls all day long doesn't work. The statistics and the research shows that students, it's less effective than a teacher in a classroom. The textbook model of just being able to give access to resources and nothing else doesn't work. We really need to be looking at how do we think about more advanced technologies in assisting our students. And also we need to be looking at how do we make sure that we provide them with the right sorts of skills, because actually what no one's focusing on at the moment is the 60% that didn't get admissions to further education. Well, what's happening to them over the next 1 to 2 years, especially while TVET colleges and CETAs are also kind of struggling with the pandemic. And to me, that shows that maybe of our 36% that are actually admitted to further education, what happens at the end of year one in terms of dropout, which is significantly higher at about 46% of year one tertiary students drop out because they're not prepared properly. So then we end up with a very small percentage of the population in highly skilled workforce. And that has an impact, obviously, on employability. Yeah. But I think, even though I'm sort of painting a doom and gloom, I think the lessons that we need to be focusing on is that 60%. How do we support them? How do we make sure we equalize and democratize the education that we're providing for students? And that's not just about providing some resources, scattering it to them, providing some radio broadcasts and thinking that we're done. We need to be providing more feedback to those students, because it's quite clear the majority of our students actually don't have the sort of proficient education that's going to allow them to move forward in terms of their employability.
I mean, this is the real crux of the conversation, and I'm going to emphasize and repeat a bit of what you've actually said, because there is this argument that that is against saying everyone should be going to university. Bachelor passes at the low that you mentioned, 36.4%, and 26% with diploma passes. Now, when you speak to university lecturers, and you yourself said it as well, is that the first year we see a massive dropout rate, but even those that are in university, they don't understand the material, because school basically teaches you to memorize as opposed to understand and apply the knowledge learned. That's what some of the complaints are that come from university lecturers. Is the quality of learning enough for those with a bachelor pass to not only attend a university, but to actually cope at that level? And, it almost sounds like, this kind of learning is still used. And the problem with that is that it doesn't prepare learners for university. Not enough independent thinking is what a lot of people have said. I mean, let's perhaps dwell on that for a bit.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the actual way of measuring how successful was the cohort of 2020 is looking at the retention rate of tertiary admissions at the end of 2021. And then we'll be able to understand, did we prepare our students properly? That will be the metric that I'll be looking at to really think, well, what does that mean? So if that ends up being 15%, then that's actually what we should be looking at and saying, half of our learners that even got admissions were not able to continue with their degrees. And we need to, as a country, for innovation and for sustainability reasons, we need to have a highly skilled workforce. It's not always about that everybody has to go to university to be a significant or a contributing member of the society. But we still need to understand that we can't have engineers that are not qualified. We can't have scientists that are not qualified. We can't even have technicians in the technology space, IT space, that are not qualified. Unfortunately, the quick fix is not just TVET education. We really do need to be building towards tertiary education. We cannot be lowering the standards of tertiary education. And I do think that there is a gap, particularly in our STEM areas, that we provide enough to get students to pass, enough to get students to sit examinations, but examination readiness and real content mastery are two very different things. Yeah. And I think that that's what we really need to be working on, because it is the explicit instruction and the conceptual learning that we need to work on more than just exam preparation.
Dr. Varady, there are also concerns about the quality of our education. I mean, the 33% pass mark and the fact that some learners are actually pushed through. They don't even necessarily make the 33%, but they are just pushed through the system, because if not, you get this massive backlog. I mean, what do you think of these concerns?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting and very unique structure that a lot of was certainly unique on the continent and quite surprising to a lot of the departments when we talk about this and how South Africa has structured it. In many ways, I understand the need for having to graduate students through a system, if the system on the other side, and that's why I keep talking about the 60% that don't have admissions, if there is something to be able to catch that 60%, then I sort of don't mind what matriculation means, because, the assessment results in this summative way is not the be all and end all. But if we don't have a policy to look at that 60%, that if we're not providing properly for the 36% plus, that are going off to university or further education, as I like to call it, which includes all, then what are we doing for the 60%? So whether or not the pass mark is 33% or it's 50%, as it is everywhere else on the continent, is kind of irrelevant. I think what we should be looking at is what are we doing to support those in the 60% to look at career opportunities, to look at programs that they can join, to look at other vocational education that they can apply to. And also maybe that there needs to be bridging for them, because clearly whatever we're doing in secondary school is not getting them to standards that would be globally applicable, or would they even be applicable by standards of the African continent. That's really where I think we need to be focusing some of our area. Again, it comes back to, are we providing the quality of education in a content mastery point of view, in a conceptual understanding point of view? Are we providing that to our students, or actually are we just trying to get them across the line so that they can move through the system? Yeah. And I think at the moment there is a bit of that.
Yeah. Dr. Varady, very, very quickly, as our wrapping answer, if I can give you just maybe 30 seconds, or I know it's a tough one, but, TVET colleges and skills, we keep talking to the fact that in South Africa we don't have enough skills. And I mean, I remember that there were many learners in my time that didn't finish school. They learned a skill, and they're doing exceptionally well. It just seems that has fizzled out, and you're forced to push through a schooling system and then try and go and get a bachelor of something. I mean, you even look at funding, that this week we're hearing they're not funding certain of these TVET college courses. Now, what do you make of this? I mean, is this just not running this for those learners that want to go in that direction?
I mean, I think certainly in this instance, we should be looking at how do we catch those students earlier? Because if I was a matriculant, I got 40%, I'd be a bit frustrated that I'd had to go through 12 years of schooling to now have to try and make decisions and not to really have had a mark that's going to get me anywhere. We should have caught them, before they went into FET, so that we could actually guide them maybe towards vocational studies if that was the best option. But again, many of these students, if we look at the no fee pay students and the percentage of those students who are able to go to into higher or further education, it was extraordinarily high. So it proves to us that socioeconomic disparity does not mean that you cannot perform. We just need to catch some of those students earlier so that we can put them into various trades earlier so that they don't have to finish matriculation and get a mark of 40%.
Yeah, and be completely disheartened. Dr. Varady, thank you very, very much for joining us. We'll have to wrap it there. Dr. Corrin, who's an education analyst, discussing this year's challenging matric results and just generally the quality and preparedness of learners in our education system in the country.
Very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Congratulations once more to the class of 2020 and wishing you all the best. This is where we have to say goodbye. The agenda up next with Desiree Chauke.